So I want to dedicate today's shir to the neshama of my brother-in-law. His shloshim is today. Michal ben Yibad L'chaim Tovim Yehuda Leib. Yeah. I'm sorry? Yeah.
Looks like such a solid guy.
He was. Very, very sensitive, kind soul. Generous young man.
Really sorry for him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So before we get to the Gemara, I'm just going to share some comments from Rabbi Gimple that are useful since they're related to discussion we had last week on Friday. We were wondering how old Miriam was at the time of the decree. She was 5. And we were wondering about Batya and whether she left Egypt. So from a number of sources, Rabbi Gimple tells us that Batya did leave Egypt, thanks to her saving Moshe Rabbeinu. She merited to leave Egypt with the Jewish people. And she actually married Kalev, which would make her sister wives with Miriam, because we had learned that Kalev married Miriam. If Batya also married Kalev, that would make them sister wives. So yeah. Miriam is 5, Batya is somewhat older, adopting Moshe Rabbeinu, and Batya interacts with Miriam regarding bringing a wet nurse, which turned out to be Moshe's mother, Yocheved, their mother. And then years later, I suppose, they become sister wives, Miriam and Batya marrying Kalev. That's quite interesting. And he also quotes a source that tells us that that Batya ended up going into Gan Eden alive, like Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who entered Gan Eden alive. So it seems like she's quite a lofty soul.
She deserves it.
Yeah, she deserved all of it. She risked her life in the most daring of times and daring of ways.
Yeah. She reminds me of, was it Rachel, or I keep getting mixed up between the two, when she was living with her Lavan.
Mm-hmm.
They were all,
yeah, you mentioned that, Rachel living with Lavan. Rivka, I'm sorry, Rivka.
They were all worshipers,
yeah.
And she was.
And she's remained true. That's
very similar. Right?
Yeah.
So Miriam was 5? Because we had it.
We're discussing how old she might have been. So Moshe, she was 5. Yeah, I actually knew that. She was. Now that I think about it, it's in the Chumash and Rashi that she was 5 years older than her brother Moshe.
Okay.
Well, 5 and a bit. But, yeah.
5 and a bit, yeah.
And then Aaron and him.
And these stories came from our stories. This information came from the Midrash.
The Midrash and Gemara are various different sources, number of sources. Okay, so now we get to our subject. We have a new narrative, quite fascinating story as well, with lots of lessons to be learned. So this is exciting. So we're we're Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, that's 13a, second of the wider set of lines. The line begins the word Nivuasa, and then there's the colon, and then there is Yosef Zacha V'Cholim. So the context here is the Mishnah is discussing the law of the Sotah, of course. And the law of the Sotah, as we learned way back when, is measure for measure. We're going to come back to the law of the Sotah, not to worry. The law of the Sotah is measure for measure. That's what the Mishnah told us, that the procedures of the Sotah, ripping her clothing and undoing her hair, is all measure for measure, considering her lewd behavior. Now, in that context, the Mishnah told us that we have historically people who suffered measure for measure, and then we have people who were blessed measure for measure. And we discussed Miriam. We actually had Shimshon first, Samson, and who else did we have in between? I'm missing. We discussed Samson measure for measure, and then from there we went straight to Miriam, right? Yeah, Miriam measure for measure, and now Yosef measure for measure. Yosef put effort into burying his father with great honor and dignity. Almost the entire last chapter of Genesis, chapter 50, is a description of the proceedings of Jacob's internment. First, the Egyptians embalmed him, and then they cried over him, and then they traveled. And as they traveled, as they traveled from Egypt to Israel, where Jacob asked to be buried, he asked to be buried in the cave, the tomb, in the cave of Machpelah, at the cave where his parents were buried, and Yitzchak's and his grandparents, and Adam and Chava as well. Adam and Eve are buried as well. So he has to be interned there. And Yosef negotiates permission from Pharaoh to do that. And they all leave in this whole great procession from Egypt going to Israel to bury them there. And along the way, they stop. And there are kind of funerals all along the way until they get to the land of Israel. So this is a beautiful, dignified procession for Yaakov to be buried. And measure for measure, he had the greatest of all people take care of his internment, Moshe Rabbeinu, who made sure that his bones were taken from Egypt and brought 40 years later to Israel to be buried there in Shechem. Right, that's where he's buried, in Shechem. So we're now going to discuss that narrative of Yosef treating his father and honoring him in his last journey into burial.
Shechem, because that's where Dinah was violated.
Right? Isn't that where Yosef is buried, in Shechem? Isn't that right? No, Rachel's in Shechem, and Yosef is in. No, sorry, Rachel's in Beis Lechem.
She's
No, I'm getting
buried
confused.
along the route.
In Beis Lechem, and Yosef is Shechem. Not mistaken. And check this out. The tomb of Joseph, it's something you can still visit today. I mean, it's under Arab control, but in theory,
that's where Dinah was violated, right? Shechem.
yeah. Tomb of Joseph.
And they're related.
Yeah.
Daughter,
Yeah, Nablus in Shechem. She's buried in Shechem. Yeah, that's where their sister was.
So it's married to Dinah's daughter.
Right. Right.
Your opinions on that?
Yeah. So Yosef is buried in Shechem. Rachel's in Beis Lechem. Yeah. So there's a connection there. Okay. So let's see now the narrative, the story of Yosef taking care of his father's interment. I don't know. I'm sure there is.
No, I'm sure there is.
Yeah. What you said sounds right, and I'm sure there's more to it as well. Sorry?
Shechem. Joseph was buried in Shechem. So I
Is-
wanted to know why.
He's married to
Asnat,
Osnat,
who is made, in one opinion, is the
daughter of Dinah. So it's his
violated in Shechem.
so it's his mother-in-law's. It's the place where his mother-in-law was violated, and that's where he's buried. That's what you're referencing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sure there's more. Sorry, that's Rachel.
That's
Rachel in Beit Lechem. Anyway, I think it's under Arab control at the moment, but I'm pretty sure there are ways to get to Joseph. Yeah. Okay, so let's see the story of Yosef burying his father and the journey, the voyage from Egypt to Canaan to get that done. So the Gemara first notes as follows. We're looking at the verses in chapter 50. It's verse 7 and 8. So verse 7 reads as follows. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and there went up with him all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his home, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. It's chapter 50, Genesis, verse 7. Then verse 8 reads, and all of the house of Joseph and his brothers and the house of his father went up with him, with the exception of the young children, their flock and their cattle, those they left in the land of Goshen. So verse 7 and 8 describes the initial voyage, and there it describes first the members of the house of Pharaoh going along with Joseph. And only afterwards, in verse 8, does it describe the Jewish people going up, the children of Jacob. So the procession is Joseph, followed by the members of the household of Pharaoh, the dignitaries of Egypt, and then behind them, the brothers of Joseph. Then in verse 14, on their return, right, verse 14 is their return. Yeah. So that was verse 7 and 8. And then verse 9, 10, 11, 12, and 14 describes the journey and the burial, how they stopped in certain places, and there they had like funeral processions in various different places. And then finally they came to the cave of Machpelah and buried him there. And then verse 14 describes their return. And there, when it describes their return, it says as follows. And Joseph returned to Egypt, him and all of his brothers, and all those who came with him to bury his father. So on the way up, it describes first the dignitaries of Egypt and then the brothers of Joseph. On the way back to Egypt, the way down, it describes first the brothers of Joseph and then the Egyptians. So why the switch? Why the turn? Why on the way up are the Egyptians first and the brothers second? On the way down, brothers first, Egyptians second. That's the Gemara's first initial question. So something must have happened that changed the dynamics of the relationship that made this switch on the way down. So what's going on? Says the Gemara. Why is it that in the first instance, initially, when they went up to Egypt, to Israel, Diksiv, there it reads, Vayal Yosef Likbaras Aviv. Joseph went up to bury his father. Vayalo Itoy, and there went up with him, as called Avdei Pharaoh, all the servants of Pharaoh, etc. Bahadar, and only afterwards, after describing the dignitaries of Egypt going with Joseph, then it says in the next verse, and all of the house of Joseph and all the brothers were based other than the house of his father. So why is it then the way up? It describes first the dignitaries of Egypt and then the brothers. And why does it change at the end when they come down, when they come back to Egypt on the return journey? Diksiv, where there it reads, Yosef Mitzrayim, and Joseph returned to Egypt. He, Va'achav and his brothers, Vahadar, and only afterwards, and all the rest of the people who came up with him, Likbar us Aviv, to bury his father, only afterwards describing the rest of the community, the rest of the people, which are the dignitaries of Egypt. So what's the switch? What happened? So says the Gemara, okay, so in order to understand the switch, let's look at the verses in between. Right? Because that was verse 7 and 8 describing the way up. Verse 14 coming down. So verse 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 describing the journey and then the burial. So what happened in the middle in these verses that made the switch? At the beginning, they were not respectful to the brothers of Yosef. They left them in the back. But on the way down, they gave respect to the brothers of Yosef, putting them in the front. Following? Yeah, so what happened in the middle? Yeah, we clear?
Yeah, no, but it's okay.
On the way up,
Okay.
first, right? They're going to bury Yosef, Yaakov.
Okay, right.
So they're traveling from Egypt to Israel, and then Israel back to Egypt.
Okay.
So on the way up, first in the procession, there's Yosef. He's second to the king, so he's certainly in the front. Behind him, the dignitaries of Egypt, and behind them, the brothers.
Oh.
So the brothers weren't given that much honor by the dignitaries of Egypt. But the way down, they do honor the brothers. They put the brothers in the front, and the Egyptians, stand in the back.
Down means what?
Back from Israel down to Egypt.
Oh.
South, right? You're going south.
Right.
So wait, who was the first, Joseph?
Joseph is always first. He's second to the king.
And then it was the dignitaries of Egypt,
Then the brothers on the way up.
On down.
Way down is Joseph, brothers, then Egypt. So the Egyptians acquiesced, allowed the brothers go in front of them the way down. So something in the middle must have happened, changing the dynamics. Clear?
The brothers were ahead of the Egyptians.
On the way down,
Right.
way back. So something changed.
It has to do with geography in terms of where you're coming from.
Well, we don't have to guess. We can look at the Gemara. The Gemara's going to tell us what happened. Right?
So it's good to try to guess.
Yeah.
Only that Yosef let his dignitaries go before his brothers, because Yosef was in charge.
True, you can
So
tell.
that's a good question why Joseph allowed that to happen. But it seems like maybe he didn't have, maybe he was worried about, them reporting back to Pharaoh that Joseph was disrespectful to Egypt. We represent Pharaoh, and here he is giving his brothers honors over us. Maybe he was worried about that. I don't know. So maybe there's some political consideration. But something changed in the journey. Then the way back, they did give honor to the brothers, putting them in front. So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. So again, the way up is verses 7 and 8. And the way down is verse 14. So there's the verses in between 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 that we have to look at to see where this change happens.
9, 10, 11, and 12.
Right, which describes first the journey up and how they stopped in this place called Garden Atat, which we're going to analyze in a moment. And whether they had a 7-day morning on their journey up to Israel. In Israel, there's an event also before the burial that something happens, and those two events is what opened the eyes of the Egyptians to give honor to the brothers over themselves. So let's see, we clear on this?
Yeah, so we have to,
Yeah.
we said 9, 10, 11, and 12.
That's right. So that's what the Gemara is going to analyze presently.
Mhm.
So says the Gemara this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, B'tchila.
I'm sorry, could you point me to which one?
So the wider set of lines on 13a, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. In the middle there's a Aleph Reish, Amar Rabbi
That's
Yochanan.
it.
Yeah,
You got it, Mayor?
count 5 lines down from there, and you'll see Amar Rabbi Yochanan.
Yeah.
Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, B'tchila, initially, when they were on their way up from Egypt to Israel, before they really observed the true honor of the children of Israel, the Jewish people, they didn't really properly respect them because they never really truly seen the honor that they deserve. And I would imagine the reason is because the Jews are living in the land of Goshen, which is in the northern part of Egypt, and the people who serve Pharaoh are living in a big city with Joseph. So they saw Joseph's honor, but they didn't know who his brothers were. They were living in farmlands.
Right.
So they never saw really the honor that the brothers deserved. They just knew, okay, it's Joseph's brothers, farmers, cattle, not farmers, shepherds.
Right.
Joseph's brothers are shepherds. Okay, very nice. They didn't think of them as anybody special. But then on this journey, they saw how special they were just by the very fact that they were children of Yaakov. And seeing that, on the way down, they gave them proper honor.
Maybe they weren't like garbed in royalty like Joseph was.
They certainly weren't. They were dressed like shepherds.
Right.
Right? It's not just the garb, but there's something you're going to see. There's an event that allowed them to see that they really need to honor the brothers of Yosef just because they're sons of Yaakov, for that alone. And then for the Besoif, at the end, when they came, time the journey was over and they were on their return, at this point they did see the honor of Yaakov and therefore his children. Nogu ben Kavod, they gave them respect and therefore they traveled in front. So what was the event that happened in the middle that made the Egyptians see the honor that they should accord to the brothers of Yosef, the sons of Yaakov?
So this is the Egyptian people that determined the order of honors.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's because Yosef politically is worried about these guys reporting back to Pharaoh that here Pharaoh sent his people to honor his father and he just disrespected us.
Okay.
That's what I imagine it
makes
is.
sense.
Yeah, that's what I imagine it is. Like here we are representing the Pharaoh and we're being thrown in the back behind these shepherd people.
But there's also the issue of downgrading people as well. And that's a big dishonor.
But
You
to
put 'em
who?
Up in the head and then you put them in the
Oh, no,
back.
they chose to go to the back.
Oh, they chose.
They chose to go to the back because they chose to honor the brothers of Yosef because they saw something. So let's see what happened.
Oh, so they're included in.
That's right. It was their decision. It seems like it was their decision to switch from taking the honor in the front to taking a step back to honor the brothers. So what happened? So this is what they saw. Says the Gemara like this. The Ksiv, the verse reads, so this is verse 10. So it's in between. It's in the journey, right? Verse 7 and 8 describe them going up, 14 coming down. So this is verse 10. So it's right there in the description of their journey. And there it says, Vayavoyu, they arrived, this whole entourage leaving from Egypt on the way to Israel, on the way to Hebron, basically, where the double cave is Ma'arat Machpelah is. Right? The Ma'arat Machpelah is the place purchased by Avram, where Avram and Sarah are buried, Yitzchak and Rivka are buried, and now Yaakov is being interned there. Leah is already buried there. Sorry, and Adam and Eve are there. That's right. So on their way, Vayavoyu ad Goren Ha'atad, they came to a place called Goren Ha'atad. Now the words Goren Ha'atad, which if you read it simply might just mean the name of the place, Goren Ha'atad. But actually, both Goren and Ha'atad mean something. Goren means a silo, like a place where you collect grain. That's what
It says here, threshing floor.
Similar thing. Goren is a place where you collect grain. And then Ha'atad means, I looked this up, it's called a box thorn bush. Box thorn bush. Yeah, I'm looking at a picture here. It's like this very thick, bushy kind of thing. You know those like if you've ever gone on a hike in Israel, in the desert, you see like these oddly shaped, like seemingly incoherent shaped bushes that kind of sprout from the ground, where there's no stem to the tree, and then like a tree growing around it. But like right from the bottom, there's like thorny bushes going all over the place. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Sorry?
Yeah, kind of like a thorny bush.
Yeah, yes, but it also has greenery. It's got greenery, but it grows kind of like kind of wildish. Like the trees we have here are very like.
And what happened to Shimshon with his hair getting? No,
Avshalom getting caught in the tree. That was a different tree. That one actually has a stem and then a very big mushroom type top. This tree is kind of like, as it right from comes out of the ground, it already has branches moving all over the place, and it's kind of thorny. You see them randomly in the desert in Israel. Like it's very, very dry, and it's not as neat as our trees. Yeah, our trees are much more neat. You know, like there's like a straight line, and then like there's branches coming out, and kind of like this circle. And it's even if you don't trim our trees, they kind of have a sort of canopy around. This one's like a very like wildish kind of bush. But anyway, you'll look at the video later. You'll see the picture. I'm putting it up on the screen here. At any rate, the point is, so this place called Goren Ha'atad, where they stopped, and for 7 days they mourned Yaakov. The people came together to mourn Jacob on the journey. So this place is called Goren Ha'atad. As I just translated, Goyen Atad would translate as a threshing ground, or like a place to collect grain of this thorn bush, this box thorn. And if the Gemara asks, do you actually have threshing floors and silos for these thorn bushes, this box thorn? No one does that. There's no value in it. It's not like, you collect them and make, turn them into bread. So what's the story with that? Right? Why would we call it Goyen Hatad? You have a silo and you have a threshing ground for wheat, for barley, for things that are like edible and useful, but not for these random bushes. So what kind of name is Goyen Hatad? Which is like the threshing ground of this bush. What kind of name is that? No one has threshing grounds for these bushes.
It doesn't produce grain.
It doesn't produce grain, so why would you do that? So does this atad tree, does this boxthorn tree have a threshing ground, have a silo? No, it doesn't have that. So therefore, there must be some other hidden encoded message in this Goyen Ha'atad. Says the Gemara, Rabbi says, Malamed, this comes to teach us, Shikifu ksorim la'aronis shal Yaakov. Yaakov's casket was surrounded with crowns, kagoden, just like a threshing ground for wheat or for something else. Shemakifin le'atad, that you surround it with these bushes to protect it, I guess, to keep animals out. You put this kind of bushy thing around the threshing ground to protect the grain on the inside. So just like the threshing ground for wheat is protected by a crown, a ring of these bushes, so it is that the casket of Yaakov was surrounded by crowns. What crowns were it surrounded by? Says the Gemara. Shabo b'nei Esav b'nei Yishmael b'nei Yishmael u'b'nei Keturah. All of the cousins of the brothers of Yosef and his brothers came. Who are his cousins? His first cousins are the children of Esav, right? Yaakov's twin brothers Esav. So his children came.
Esav's children came?
It's their uncle. It's their uncle's funeral.
I know they hated each other.
They had a kind of quasi-peace then, right? When Yaakov met Esav and they said, let's go our separate ways and we won't fight. So there's a kind of quasi-peace. So I guess, but we're going to see, they came antagonistically a little bit, but we'll see. So the children of Esav came. Yes, we're going to see, we're going to get there. Let's not jump ahead. So let's not jump ahead. So the Gemara here actually is a little bit of a different version to the story. Let's see. Fascinating story. Anyway, so the cousins come to pay respects to their uncle, the children of Esav, as well as the children of Yishmael, who are their second cousins, right? Their grandfather Yitzchak's brother Yishmael, his children would be Yaakov's cousins. So it's Yaakov's nephews, the children of Esav, Yaakov's cousin, the children of Yishmael, as well as Bnei Keturah. Keturah is one of the wives of Abraham. It's another set of cousins. So it's first cousins, second cousins, and third cousins all come to pay respects to their cousin / uncle to Yaakov. Right? And what do? Notlu kulun kisrehen. All of these people, they all took their crowns. The Torah lists them all. If you remember way earlier in the Chumash, the Torah lists Esav. These are the chieftains of the clan of Esav, and describes the various different clans, the names of the clans, and who was the chieftain of each clan. Right? So all of these people were like leaders of their tribes, and they all had crowns, considering that they were leaders of their tribes. So Natlakulun Kisrayan, they all took off their crowns, the Taluim Barenish al Yaakov, and they put it onto the casket of Yaakov. This is their way of paying respect. So, and Tana, we learned that this totaled Shloishim V'Shishta Ksarim. No, I missed the line, sorry. I'm sorry. I missed a very important line. Let's back up. Shabo b'nei Esav b'nei Yishmael. I realize I'm missing part of the story. The cousins, the children of Esav, the children of Yishmael, the children of Keturah, they all came. First cousin, second cousin, they all came. Now, Tana, we've been taught, they actually all came with the intention of waging war against their cousins. Yaakov is dead, the uncle's dead. Let's deal with this now.
Yeah, finish him off.
But Kivin Shiro Kisr Shal Yosef, Ta'olo Bareni Shal Yaakov. When they saw the crown of Yosef sitting on the ark of Yaakov, the casket of Yaakov. So they saw this great honor given to Yaakov, right? And they saw that Yosef has behind him the force of Egypt. They realized that this is a force to be reckoned with. They can't just come here and fight. Not going to work out. Even though there are multiple clans, they don't compare to the superpower of Egypt. So they see the Egyptian crown, which belongs clearly to Yosef, to their cousin, sitting on the casket of Yaakov. So they have a change of heart. And therefore, they, instead of trying to fight, they decided to pledge allegiance, demonstrate allegiance. It's a smarter move to do. It doesn't say, the Gemara doesn't say whether they changed their heart because they were inspired or out of fear, they just decided to pledge allegiance to Yosef rather than fighting. I imagine it's the latter. It should be bad tactic to fight Yosef when this guy got the force of Egypt behind you. What you crazy? Right? So what do they do? Not look at the superpower of the day. So not look at now all of them took their crowns, all these chieftains I mentioned earlier, they took their crowns, they placed it onto the casket of Yaakov.
Was it feigning honor?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if it was legit, it was out of fear or out of awe, reverence, love. I'm not sure. It doesn't say. I could see it going in many directions.
Right.
At any rate, the point is, Tana, we learned at this point, there were 36 crowns surrounding the casket of Yaakov, and that's what's called Goren Ha'atad, the threshing ground of this bush. Meaning to say that just like a threshing ground is surrounded by this bush as a protective crown, so too Yaakov's casket is surrounded by these crowns. This inspired the reverence of the Egyptians. They saw there that Yosef's power and the Jewish Yaakov's power is not just in Egypt, but international. And when they saw that, then they said, okay, we got to give a special honor to the children of Yaakov, which is the brothers of Yosef. And this is what made them change their opinion. And we're going to see more events that made them change their opinion. But that was the beginning. Moreover, the verse reads, now this is continuing verse 10. So we're describing what happened in this place called Goren Ha'atad. First of all, the first thing that happened is 36 crowns. Rashi actually breaks down how we get to 36. Why 36? Counting all the chieftains of Esav, Yosef's crown. He gives a whole calculation of how I get to 36 exactly, right? Which is itself a significant number. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow. But the verse there says, and there in Goren Ha'atad, in this place where they surrounded Yaakov's casket with all these crowns, it says that they mourned there, misbad gadol v'kavod ma'od. They mourned there, or they mourned, or they eulogized a great and exceedingly heavy eulogy, or great and exceedingly heavy, exceedingly weighty mourning.
A great and solemn ceremony.
Yeah, but the literal translation is gadol is great. Kavod means heavy or weighty, or like heavy. Ma'od exceedingly. So says the Gemara, Tana, we learned it was so involved that afilu susim v'afilu chamorim, even horses and donkeys joined in the mourning of Yaakov. So this again is another reason why the Egyptians see, okay, it's time to honor Yaakov and his children, not just because Yosef is an extension of Pharaoh, but because there's something special about Yaakov himself. So these are the things that they're watching, observing. The next part of the story, which you made reference to about Esav dying at this point, that we'll get to tomorrow. But I'm just going to, I think the Gemara doesn't really explain how we get from heavy and weighty, or gadol v'kavod, great and heavy, to mean even donkeys and horses. I imagine on a simple level, it means that there's like a kavod ma'od, which means very heavy, is the way you described a donkey's load, or a horse's load. Like that's the point of a horse and a donkey, to carry this heavy stuff. So maybe that's the reference. I'm not sure. I can think of spiritual meaning to what the significance of horses and donkeys are, but we'll leave that for tomorrow. When we conclude the narrative, maybe we'll revisit it and try to see on a spiritual level what this all means. 36 crowns coming from Esav, and then the donkeys and the horses. What does this mean? And then the changing of the minds of the Egyptians, first not giving honor, then yes giving honor. All of that, I think, is spiritually interconnected. And perhaps we'll look at that tomorrow once we conclude the narrative of Yaakov's burial. So cliffhanger, more to come, because it's a very, very unique story that happens here.
Were there she donkeys?
I don't know. Maybe. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.